today's video conference series. I'm Jason Scorza, Associate Provost for Global Learning here at FDU, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you this morning's program. Our discussion will be on United Nations reform, and specifically the role of NGOs and civil society, prospects of reform, and likely future scenarios. Just to go over the ground rules, we will be joined by United Nations HQ. There will be a presentation and discussion, and then we will have an opportunity for each of the sites to engage in Q&A. And we'll proceed in the Q&A from Bergen Academy's Teterboro to Bergen Academy's Hackensack, and then lastly to FDU Metro Campus. It is my great pleasure now to introduce to you Ambassador Ahmad Kamal, who will introduce our speakers for today. Over to you, Excellency.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back with you at Fairleigh Dickinson, and a great pleasure to have two high schools with us, because the more we get younger students interested, perhaps the better the result of UN reform is going to be. I have always maintained that we are underutilizing the power of youth in the United Nations, and that too many of us in the UN are above the age of 30, which is for me the cutoff age by which either you do something in life or you don't. And if we are where we are today at the United Nations, it is because the average age of the United Nations Secretariat today is 50 years old. No institution can go into the 21st century with an average age of 50. But what gives me even greater pleasure is to have with us two distinguished panelists. To my left is Ms. Swart. Ms. Swart is the Executive Director of the Center for UN Reform Education. This is a very prominent NGO which is watching the United Nations carefully in order to identify shortcomings, possible solutions, and doability of possible solutions. And this is done by the center through a process of research and studies, and through the publication of the results of their research on a website, which I would strongly recommend to everybody on this video conference. It is just simple: www.centerforunreform.org. And also that this center publishes material, and the latest one is Managing Change at the United Nations, which is the booklet that I'm holding in my hands, of which a copy is available on the website of the center. Next to Ms. Swart is Mr. von Freiesleben, who is the senior researcher at the center. Do not be carried away by his young looks. This is a person of dangerous maturity. He is an advisor to the Afghanistan government on watching matters at the United Nations, and is therefore closely associated both with the center and with the Afghanistan mission to the United Nations. It's my pleasure to welcome both of you here. With your permission and with the permission of our audience, let me lead into the subject directly. We are sitting in a building which somehow thinks it is the center of the world. This is the United Nations headquarters. But if you go out on First Avenue, which is just the outside wall of this building, and stop 100 people and ask them, what does the UN do? None of them will be able to give you a correct answer, and the one who does say he knows something will not know what the UN really does. And the reason for that is not that the UN does something that is not being projected, but that the UN basically is a non-functioning institution. Now, I would like to suggest to you that there are 5 serious shortcomings in the United Nations system. The first is that it is established not in 1945, as they tell everybody, but in 1944 in Dumbarton Oaks, and that it was established by 4 and only 4 countries. They are the only real members of the United Nations. The others are adjuncts. And so the fact that since 1945 we've had a huge expansion of the United Nations. Original membership was 4 plus 46, which was 50. And now it is 4 plus 187, which is 192. And that multiplication of membership by 4 has given rise to the impression that there is a democratic setup in the United Nations. But it is not a democratic setup. It's a setup in which power, actual power of action, is controlled by 4 or 5 countries only. And the rest of us are very good at talking, very good at high moral ground, but not very good at ensuring action. And so the concept of reform of the UN has to start with, first and foremost, identifying, are we an aristocracy or are we a democracy? And I would like your views on this. But there are 3 other problems. The UN starts by saying that it's an anti-war organization. That's the fundamental purpose. The opening lines are to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. But then it goes ahead to define war as world war, because it says wars which twice in the course of this generation have caused untold sorrow to mankind. And so the UN basically was established as an institution to stop World War III. And perhaps it has done that. But we've had more than 350 wars since 1945. And more people have died in these wars than in World War I and World War II combined. And you, Ms. Swart, you come from Netherlands, which is the heart of the area which saw the devastation of these 2 wars. And so the UN may have stopped World War III. I don't know whether there was any danger or no danger. But what I do know is that we've had 350 wars, local, regional, ethnic wars, and that they continue to devastate the globe, mankind. And so where is the UN? And what are you doing about UN reform in wars? The third problem is economic development, which is the causes of war. We know that wars are generated by economic causes, essentially. And so the UN was supposed to create a better world. But the better economic world is missing. The gap has doubled even in the last 40 years. It is now 90 to 1 between the average rich countries and the average poor countries. It used to be only 40 to 1 in 1970. And so with all the economic effort of the UN, we are not getting there. The gap is doubling, it is devastatingly large, and poverty, believe it or not, is increasing in the world. And those of us who think that we are living better because we dress better and because in the United States at least we eat better, which is why their problem is obesity, whereas my problem is hunger and starvation. And so what type of a world is this in which we have poverty as endemic and increasing? And what has the UN or the multilateral system done to obviate that danger? And finally, the Charter. The UN has a charter, which is the constitution of the UN, and it's an international treaty. Charters and constitutions are meant to be amendable. In other words, they must